Hi, my name is Shawnee Leaf, and I'm presenting on leadership and employee voice, specifically how stress levels influence leadership styles and that influences communication. So, a little bit of background. I work for a small department of 6 people in a community college, and at hiring, I was told that my skills were very much needed because they needed to make a lot of changes as far as how the department operated. Because we had been losing students at a drastic rate. We had an 87% drop, for example, in the past 2 years that I've worked there. The flow of communication is very low, upward or downward. Employees typically always complain about how they're left out of the loop, and management style is either punitive. I personally haven't been given a performance review unless it's been a negative talk. And so kind of to make this a little bit more salient, I've been given a presentation to work on, and I was given a deadline of, 3 weeks and Tuesday. And so the day before, it was still not done. I'd, implemented their suggestions. And so I took my the day off, which was the day that it was due. I completed my presentation, sent it to my my manager, and she's like, hey, I know your meeting's today. Here's the presentation. Good luck. And she had responded saying, oh, it was actually not a hard deadline. And the meeting was canceled a week and a half ago. So I was like, okay, that's great. I wish I would have known to not have to take my day off and use it for work. So I realized there was a communication problem, and I talked to my colleagues and saw that they share the same views. And so I ended up finding a free software that we could have been using to help try to solve that problem. I had created the prototype. I had trial run it with my colleagues. They really appreciated and supported it too. I brought it to my manager, totally shut it down and said, that's not your place. You're trying to make organizational changes. I don't like that. And you're on file duty for 2 weeks, which was totally horrible. And, I had a lot of job burnout, low satisfaction, disengagement from work because of that. So the theories that are important in this kind of problem, one is leadership. And so the textbook talks about leader-member exchange. And so it's focusing on the quality of leader-member relationships. It also talks about in-group versus out-group, which there definitely is in my department, and high and low quality relationship. That also, high leader-member exchange relationships include lots of upward and downward communication, which is the other theory that's very important in this. And in this specific context, we're going to be talking about employee voice, which is the willingness and ability for employees to communicate concerns to their supervisors. The textbook mentions that there's definitely not enough of this going on in organizations, and how that's basically a shame because it can lead to a lot of innovation and increase in company operation. The other one is stress. So obviously lack of autonomy, underutilization, and lack of support increase workers' stress, which decreases their work performance. It's very true. And job burnout. As you can see, it's a very dynamic relationship between stress, communication, and leadership. In that high quality leadership and communication, there's a positive relationship versus an inverse relationship with stress. For example, someone that has a high quality leadership will have a lot of communication versus someone that's really stressed out, they feel very isolated from their work, will have lack of communication. So there I found a study that is studying the managerial self-efficacy, ego defensiveness, and the aversion to employee voice. The theoretical background. So their hypothesis is that managers that are feeling that they have low leadership self-efficacy kind of are experiencing a state of ego threat and are on the defensive, and therefore their willingness to accept employee feedback or suggestions is very low because they see it as a critique of their character, their ability, their performance, and decision-making as a leader. They did a 2-part study, which was the first part was correlational, and it surveyed managers and employees' views of managerial self-efficacy and solicitation for and behavior of employee voice. The results were that they found the low managerial self-efficacy predicted lower levels of solicitation for and behavior of employee voice. And they also showed through the controls how the relationship between how much managers ask for input and employees actually feel comfortable sharing input increased levels of job satisfaction, while the absence of that kind of relationship increased the feelings of futility. And the second study was really cool. It was an experimental study, and so participants read a script about a managerial scenario, and they're asked to take on that role. The script contained a scenario where identified a problem. The manager has to come up with a solution and is presenting the solution in a meeting. When a subordinate comes up with an alternative solution, it's basically what do they do with that? They manipulated the feelings of self-efficacy and ego threat by stating essentially if you were, as a manager, your performance has been down, your, sales have been plummeting for 2 weeks, or versus as a manager, your sales have been increased for 2 weeks, you've been doing a great job. And so they were kind of seeing how that influenced your solicitation of voice, your how you felt towards the employee, and your willingness to implement their suggestions. So the results were that the participants that had a low self-efficacy and provoked ego threat were more likely to not solicit input. They were less willing to implement their suggestions, and they were more likely to disparage the employee as incompetent. It also talks about suggestions that future research should look to leaders' feelings about role as to determine of leadership style. So the recommendations for this, I would suggest, would be implementing organizational values for innovation, so kind of recognizing the ground level employees as a valuable resource. Accountability measures, so including in the performance evaluation of a manager to include employee input and support for voice. Positive organizational norms, increasing psychological safety. Affirmation of department values, so this one's particularly pertinent to me. The campus-wide organization, so my department doesn't have a lot of recognition or acceptance from my department, so that could probably produce feelings of managerial self-efficacy issues. And then influence strategies, so how I talk to my boss, how kind of sandwich it between, compliments. And then leadership training would be another suggestion that they would, or I would suggest. And that is it. Thank you very much, and good luck on finals.